For thousands of years, armies have built fortresses to defend important areas from attack. And while many have become more or less obsolete in the face of modern weaponry, many of history's most amazing forts still stand to this day. So for today's video, we're going to count down the top 15 most amazing fortresses in the world. Number 15. Agra Fort. While the Taj Mahal may be the Indian city of Agra's most famous attraction, Agra Fort deserves more recognition in its own right. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It was built in the 16th century out of red sandstone by the Mughal Emperor Akbar to defend Agra from its enemies. Apparently taking over 4,000 workers 8 years to construct, the end result was a 2.5-kilometer-long fort with 21-meter-high walls. Over time, the Agra Fort received some new additions, with these including a private palace for Akbar's son, Jahangir, the Pearl Mosque, which is a tranquil and perfectly proportioned structure made entirely of white marble, and the Hall of the Private Audience, which was used to entertain distinguished visitors. So yeah, a trip to the Taj Mahal wouldn't be complete without a visit to the Agra Fort. Number 14. Jaisalmer Fort. Now, generally speaking, forts are an outdated way to defend against enemies. After all, in recent years, warfare has become far more active, and this has made massive fortifications useless when defending against a mobile force. This means that many forts have taken on different usages, such as the case with Jaisalmer Fort. Considered to be one of the world's only living forts, it stands apart because while many buildings have since been built outside of it, about 1/4 of the old city's population still lives within the fort's walls. Now, the fort was built all the way back in the year 1155, and up until the 1600s, the entire population of the city lived within its walls. It's considered to be massively important for trade. The city soon began to flourish, prompting a royal palace, several ancient Jain temples, and a library called the Gyana Bandar, or Store of Knowledge, to be built. However, the city eventually lost its economic importance, and nowadays tourism is one of its biggest industries. Number 13. Edinburgh Castle. In recent years, Edinburgh has started to become a tourist hotspot, and a major reason why vacationers have been attracted to the city is its resident castle. Known simply as the Edinburgh Castle, it sits atop Castle Rock, which is a 140-meter-tall volcanic piece of rock that dominates the skyline of the city. While the area has been occupied for humans since the Iron Age, the castle was built between 1130 and 1140. And it was from here that the Scots would defend against British invaders, and over time it was invaded, recaptured, and upgraded in order to beef up the city's defenses. The castles continued to see active battle until 1745, when the last military action there happened after the Jacobites unsuccessfully tried to take it during the 45 Rebellion. From then on, it saw use as a prison, but after a major escape during the Napoleonic Wars, it was closed down and turned into a national monument. As a result, it's been painstakingly preserved and restored, and now welcomes over 2.2 million people per year. Number 12. Dover Castle. When it comes to English castles, few are quite as big or important as Dover Castle. Constructed in the 11th century, it's colloquially known as the Key to England due to the fact that it's located right on England's southeastern coast, and as such, in order to enter England, taking over the castle was of high importance. As a result, it was constantly renovated, with the castle taking its current shape during the reign of King Henry II in the 13th century and being of military importance all the way through World War II. Fit with massive walls and high watchtowers that are perched above a series of beachside cliffs, it was often subjected to attacks during wars on British soil. Even after these began to move to mainland Europe, the castle was still critical, as it was fit with heavy artillery to discourage an invasion during the Napoleonic Wars, and was used as an air raid shelter, military command center, and underground hospital during the Second World War, thanks to its series of underground tunnels. Today, the castle is protected as a national monument and can be visited on a daily basis. Number 11. Fort St. Angelo. While the rocky island of Malta is tiny, this hasn't stopped it from being a target of invasion. After all, its strategic position in the middle of the Mediterranean has made it the target of those who wish to control the peninsula, and this has led to it being attacked several times. In order to defend against such attacks and keep Malta safe from occupation, Fort St. Angelo was built. Erected in several stages between the 13th and 17th centuries, its design has varied wildly over the centuries, although its consistent record at defending against invasion has been constant. For example, in 1565, the Ottomans conducted the Great Siege of Malta in an attempt to take the island. However, against all odds, the 2,500-strong Maltese army successfully defended against the 40,000-strong Ottoman army. In later years, the fort would be occupied by the British and used to defend against the Axis in World War II, creating a strong bond between the Brits and the Maltese, who at one point even petitioned to join Britain as what would essentially become an overseas territory. In any case, Britain aside, today's fort is a massive 140,000 square foot installation that houses both an impressive military museum and incredible views of the harbor. Number 10. Murad Janjira. While most forts have been conquered at one point or another, Murad Janjira has never been invaded in a conventional way by a foreign army. It's located on an island just off the coastal town of Murud in western India. It's an immense fortification that was first built by the Koli people in the late 1200s. However, in 1489, an enemy admiral snuck his way in Trojan horse style by pretending to be a merchant with barrels full of goods. However, once inside, he waited for all the soldiers to be drunk before opening the barrels, all of which were filled with soldiers. While this led to a successful capture of the island fort, ever since it's remained impenetrable. While constant attacks by the Portuguese, the British, and the Marathas dogged the fort, none were successful. In fact, it remained such a pain in the side that when the British colonized nearly all of India, they signed a treaty where they promised that the fort would remain under local rule, making it a sole independent outpost in all of colonial India. This state of affairs continued India's independence in 1947, at which point the island was united with the state of Bombay. Now, this leaves us with one question. Why was this island so impenetrable? Well, simply put, it was defended to the nines, boasting massive walls, 26 artillery towers, and 572 cannons. It was absolutely daunting, and it was thanks to this that it was simply deemed impossible to conquer. Number 9. The Citadel of Aleppo. Of all the forts on this list, few have had a history quite as chaotic as the Citadel of Aleppo. Located in one of Syria's most important cities, it's a fortified limestone castle built all the way back in the middle of the 3rd century BC, making it one of the oldest castles in the world. Its sheer size alone makes it one of the largest, and it was this massive fortification that the Persians, Greeks, Byzantines, Mamluks, and others defended the city from outside invaders. However, by the time of the Ottoman Empire's rule, it began to lose its military significance, and in the 1500s, the townspeople began to live within its walls. When the French took over the area from the Ottomans following World War I, they expanded on previous restoration efforts by the Ottomans, making it a beautiful place to visit. However, despite lasting for thousands of years, the Syrian civil war has been a real threat. Both sides began to once again see the citadel as a strategic hub, and in August of 2012, the external gate was shelled during the Battle of Aleppo in a bout between the Free Syrian Army and the Syrian Army. In July of 2015, a bomb set off under one of the outer walls caused even more damage, while a massive magnitude 7.8 earthquake in February of 2023 also did a number on the building. However, due to the conflict, little has been done to restore the building after those incidents, and as a result, it's reportedly in a serious state of disarray. Number 8. The Mosul Sea Forts. At first glance, these sea forts look like some sort of strange steampunk tribute. After all, they're a bunch of rusty, rickety piles of metal rising out of the Thames estuary in England. In other words, they look completely and totally useless. But you may be surprised to learn that these rusty, old buildings are the Mosul Sea Forts, and that they were a set of seriously high-tech fortifications set up during the World War II era. More specifically, they were built as part of the Thames and Mersey Estuary Defense Network. The aim of this defense network was to defend against the German bombers that would terrorize London and Liverpool, and in 1942, clusters of 7 stilted buildings with a central command tower were set up. Each command tower had an anti-aircraft gun that was meant to shoot down German airplanes, and they ended up playing a crucial role in the war effort. After all, in the Thames River alone, these sea forts managed to shoot down 30 V-1 rockets, 22 enemy aircraft, and a torpedo boat, all of which would have done some serious damage had they managed to reach the port of London or the surrounding area. However, while these sea forts were useful in their day, they became completely obsolete once the war was over. As a result, many of them were knocked down, and while those that remain were often used as pirate radio stations, today the 2 that are still standing are at Red Sands Fort and Shivering Sands Fort, both of which are empty and off-limits to visitors. However, if you'd like to have a glimpse, they can be seen by boat. Moving on to number 7, Fort Knox. Of all the forts on this list, few are quite as famous as Fort Knox. It's located in Kentucky. Plans to build the fort there were first drawn up at the beginning of the Civil War. However, after the U.S. Army mistakenly deemed the area to be of little military importance, it was temporarily abandoned. While the Confederacy took advantage of this lack of military buildup to conduct raids throughout the area, it wasn't until 1918 that a military installation known as Camp Knox was created there. Camp Knox served as a training ground for U.S. troops, and in 1932, America's first mechanized cavalry troop was stationed there. This led to a flurry of developments, and today, Fort Knox is one of America's premier training centers for military installation development. However, beyond this role, it's far more famous for being the location of about half of the United States' official gold reserves. Home to about 75 million troy ounces of gold, the security at the bullion depository is very tight, to put it lightly. Guarded by the U.S. Mint Police, there are multiple guard towers, fences, and undisclosed security features that stop you from getting in. However, even if you do find yourself inside, you'll have a tough time getting around, as almost nobody is familiar with its very complex layout, meaning that you'll be on your own in terms of getting from point A to point B in there. If that wasn't hard enough, the safe is extremely difficult to open, and believe it or not, no one person knows all the procedures necessary to open the vault. So yeah, I'd say that the Fort Knox Bullion Depository is the dictionary definition of a closed-off facility. Number 6. The Iron Dome. Now, no matter what side of the Israeli-Palestine debate you're on, there's no question that Israel's Iron Dome plays an important role in the discourse. While not a fortress in the traditional sense, it gets a spot on this list due to its ability to effectively defend the country against missile attacks. Made with some of the best military tech in the world, it's been in service since 2011, and it's tasked with shooting down rockets that enter Israeli territory. It works by using a radar to detect rockets, and once their location is processed, a missile is sent out to collide and destroy that rocket. According to the Israeli Defense Force, the system is extremely effective against the types of short-range rockets that generally come out of Palestine, and reportedly works between 85 to 90% of the time. However, while the Iron Dome is a powerful weapon, it isn't a perfect solution. After all, medium-range missiles and ballistic missiles that could potentially come from Lebanon or Iran would be difficult for the Iron Dome to intercept. There's also an issue around quantity control, as while the Iron Dome is effective 90% of the time, the Palestinians have gotten around its effectiveness by simply launching hundreds, if not thousands of missiles at one time in order to ensure that at least some hit their targets. However, with each new upgrade, the Iron Dome becomes better, making it a formidable wall against many types of attacks. As you might expect, this effectiveness and power balance it's created between Palestine and Israel has made the Iron Dome a hot political topic ever since its inception. Number 5. Kronstadt, Fort Alexander. Most forts are large buildings located on the coast. However, Kronstadt, Fort Alexander, is different than most. That's because rather than be built on a piece of land, it's an artificial island off the Gulf of Finland in the Baltic Sea. You see, the waterway has always been of strategic importance to Russia in its defense of the city of St. Petersburg, and so in 1845 it was constructed in the middle of the Gulf. Consisting of over 5,000 square meters of space, this massive walled island contained 103 cannons and 34 guns, making it extremely difficult for enemy ships to sail past. However, despite its potential to deal some damage, it successfully deterred enemies and therefore never participated in any military action. By the late 1800s, it was obsolete in defending against rifled artillery, and so in 1896 the decision was made to decommission it from military service and use it for less violent means. More specifically, from 1896 until 1917, it was used as a bacteria research facility where scientists could be in isolation as they studied the effects of plague. However, after the Russian Revolution in 1917, research at the island was stopped, and all the equipment was transferred to facilities on the mainland. Ever since, the fort has served a number of uses. At first, the Soviet Navy took over the fort and used it for storage and repair. However, in 1983, this role came to an end and the fort was abandoned. And while this led to an era of incredibly cool raves, in 2005, the Russian government took over and began to use it as a presidential conference center. It continues to serve in this capacity to this very day. Number 4. The Tree Fort. While the U.S. Army may be far ahead of the rest of the world in terms of military technology, they've also had a few mishaps over the years. After all, in an attempt to be creative and clever, they've also had to be a bit impractical, and such was the case with the tree forts the US Army attempted to create during the Vietnam War. You see, the idea behind these stemmed from the heavy use of helicopters during the conflict. The constant problem faced by these helicopters was that the dense jungle of Vietnam often made it impossible to land. In response, the US dreamed up an interesting idea, creating a tree fort that would sit on top of the jungle's trees so that helicopters could land and soldiers could get out. First tested out in 1965 with a prototype, it featured 2 stainless steel wire nets and a hexagonal platform made out of aluminum tubes covered with a nylon mesh. This would be set up with the help of, ironically enough, helicopters, and there was even the hope that these platforms could simply be dropped onto the jungle by airplanes to help make things more efficient. And while the fort was supposed to be able to support 10,000 pounds of weight, the whole thing proved to be very impractical. After all, because the lack of guardrails and the lack of a secure hold on the trees, the tree forts proved to be susceptible to partial breakdowns. And even when they didn't work, very few soldiers actually felt inclined to use them. And while a host of improvements made them far more reliable, by 1969 the project was effectively dead in the water. That's because rather than use these tree forts, the Pentagon opted to simply drop bombs to flatten trees and destroy parts of the jungle, thus allowing helicopters to land with ease. And while this solution was certainly effective, it was far less cool or ethical than the abandoned tree forts. Number 3. The Cheyenne Mountain Complex. The United States is undoubtedly the world's premier nation when it comes to military might, and when it comes to military installations, its mightiest within its borders is most likely the Cheyenne Mountain Complex. Located 2,900 meters above sea level in Colorado's Cheyenne Mountain, the underground city fort of sorts was first built all the way back in the 1960s during the Cold War era. More specifically, since a nuclear war seemed like a possibility, the decision was made that a command center could withstand such attacks had to be built. It was thus decided that the Cheyenne Mountain Complex would be the place where defensive strategies against long-range Soviet bombers, ballistic missiles, and nuclear attacks would be planned, and as a result it became the central command center for the United States Space Command and NORAD. Now, while this role has changed, after all, from 2008 onwards, these two organizations have moved their command central centers to nearby Peterson Space Force Base. The whole thing is nevertheless very cool. But this leaves us with one question: what exactly makes it so strong? Well, first and foremost, it's built underneath 760 meters of granite, making it extremely difficult for any type of bomb to puncture all the way through to the base. The buildings within the base are further protected by a system of more than 1,000 giant springs and a set of flexible pipe connections that limit movement from the shaking of a bomb, earthquake, or EMP to a maximum of just 2.5 centimeters. In the event that the explosion happens close to the door, this can be repelled thanks to the fact that the 25-ton doors can deflect a 30-megaton nuclear explosion from as little as 2 kilometers away, while a network of blast valves with unique filters are present to capture airborne chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear contaminants. So yeah, if things were to go sideways and the United States were to be under attack, few places would be quite as secure as the Cheyenne Mountain Complex. Number 2. The Great Wall of China. Alright, no list of fortresses would be complete without the inclusion of arguably the most impressive building of all time, the Great Wall of China. Now, one major misconception is that the Great Wall is just one wall. However, the reality is that it's actually made up of at least 16 walls, all of which make a massive network spanning that's about 2,000 years old. You see, the first parts of the wall were set up in the Gobi Desert to defend against and support raids against the Xiongnu, which were a civilization of horsemen located in modern-day Mongolia. While walls made of a super-strong mixture of mud and straw worked against them, stronger fortifications began to be made in the 1500s. These were constructed out of brick, and over a period of about 100 years, a grand total of about 8,800 kilometers of wall were built. Taking about 100 years to build, this bricked section ended up being about 7.5 meters tall, 99 meters wide, and filled with about 25,000 towers, and stretched from the Gobi Desert in the west to the Yellow Sea near the North Korean border in the east. When considered alongside the older walls, the entire expanse of the network is an incredible 21,000 kilometers, which for reference is longer than the distance between the North and South Pole. Now, it should be noted that despite its grandeur, the Great Wall was eventually penetrated. That's because in the mid-1600s, the combined threat of the Mongols and Manchus began to be too much for the Chinese Ming dynasty, as troops from these empires eventually began to conduct raids beyond the wall. This came to a head when in 1644 the commander of a section of the wall surrendered, opening the gates to allow the Manchus to stream into China. The end result was the replacement of the Ming and the establishment of the Qing dynasty, and from that point forward, the Great Wall no longer had to be used as a border defense. From then on, it fell into disarray, and while it was manned for ceremonial purposes during World War II, it was only around the mid-1950s that efforts were made to reconstruct it into a historical site. Number 1. The Maginot Line. By most accounts, one of the strongest and most useless forts of all time was the Maginot Line. Consisting of a series of concrete fortifications along the entirety of the French border, it was constructed in the 1930s to defend against a German invasion. Given Germany's destruction in France in World War I and the rise of Hitler during this time period, this seemed sensible, and on the surface, the Maginot Line looks like something that should have worked. Consisting of 482 kilometers of fortifications, there were no less than 142 large artillery forts, 352 fortified gun emplacements, and 5,000 smaller bunkers and pillboxes. These forts were connected by a series of underground mess halls, hospitals, recreation facilities, and railway lines, making it so that troops could be moved easily and so defenders could live there comfortably. However, despite all of this planning, the Maginot Line proved to be completely useless. That's because in what's now considered to be one of the biggest oversights of all time, the Germans simply went around it. Attacking through the Netherlands and Belgium, their entry point into France was the Ardennes Forest, an area with zero defenses, since the Allies had simply written it off as impassable. As a result, the Maginot Line was rendered useless, and Germany went on to quickly invade all of France. Now, what's interesting about the Maginot Line is that while it was a failure, military historians have made efforts to understand why it was so ineffective. The conclusion many have come to is that while the Maginot Line would have done well in a World War I-style, slow-paced war, it was nearly useless in the face of the fast blitzkrieg-style fighting practiced by the Nazis. When put to the test against tanks, airplanes, and heavy artillery that the Nazis were not supposed to have via the Treaty of Versailles, it was more or less useless, and as a result it marked a general end to the creation of massive combat-ready forts in modern warfare. And while the records show that the French realized that the Maginot Line was ineffective by around 1939, by then it was already far too late, and ever since, it's been seen as one of France's worst military failures. I'll see you next time. Thank you to our channel members.